With news of Star Wars Visions Season 3 on the horizon, I got thinking about Star Wars as a franchise. I grew up with Star Wars being a complete saga, episodes 1 to 6. I even got to see Revenge of the Sith in theaters as a kid. There was other material like the Force Unleashed games, Jedi Academy, the Dark Times comics, basically all the EU stuff serving as the epilogue and as additional world building. But Star Wars was always a 6-episode saga, following Anakin Skywalker's fall and redemption as the Chosen One. Ultimately, Star Wars is George Lucas's story, and nothing can take that from him. But his whole vision for that story includes the prequels. I am biased because I like the prequels and I grew up with them. But I'm also aware of all the backlash when these movies first came out. Not everyone agrees with Lucas's version of the mythology, and in my opinion, that disconnect is a big reason why Disney has had a hard time capturing what makes Lucas's Star Wars what it is. Being Lucas's vision, I believe only he could complete it in a way that makes everything finally fit. Over the years, we have gotten a deeper look at Lucas's mythology, though unfortunately, we may not see more of it visually. Disney has their own vision for the franchise, which is different from Lucas's. I think that the backlash to the prequels really set the tone for everything since. And I'm not just talking about the Disney acquisition. I mean the prequels themselves were sort of nerfed in response to the backlash to the Phantom Menace. There was definitely something going on with Jar Jar, at least in the original plans. It's like history, it rhymes. Jar Jar was going to be Yoda's opposite and counterpart in the prequels. While I do like what we ended up with characters like Dooku and such, I still think Lucas should have stuck to his guns, and maybe we could have seen the original plans. There's a really great series of videos here on YouTube by Rick Worley called How to Watch Star Wars. He goes into some really interesting detail on stuff that we never got to see, so I'm going to reference a bunch of that for my next few points. What the whole How to Watch Star Wars series revealed to me was that Lucas's original vision was massive. It was about the fall of a republic, the rise of an empire, and the defeat of that empire, and revival of that republic. Lucas had built the world out when planning the original Star Wars. He wanted everything to be related for one set of movies to recontextualize the other, and most of all, his vision was complete from the beginning. He had something in mind thematically going in. We have books like Splinter of the Mind's Eye to serve as proof that Lucas had some idea of where the story would go after A New Hope, even if we ended up with something different like The Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi. And ideas from this book and others like it were used in the prequels, according to Rick Worley. So we know these ideas were bouncing around in Lucas's head from the very beginning. They were reflected in early versions of the story, and the original plans for Star Wars looked like they were going to be 12 movies long, not even 9. Don't forget that the 3D Clone Wars show is canon, and I think it was very helpful in bringing a lot of people around to loving at least the world of the prequels. They let it breathe and gave us time to experience it. Remember that the 3D show was done with a lot of Lucas's help, and it is part of his vision. He even had a hand in designing Ahsoka herself. In order to understand what the sequels would have been, we need to get into one aspect of Lucas's Star Wars that has always fascinated me, that being the Whills. According to Lucas, Star Wars is a story being narrated by R2-D2 to a keeper of the Whills many years after it ended. Maybe that's where, in my opinion, A Long Time Ago in a Galaxy Far, Far Away comes from. The original outline for Star Wars said that this story was a part of the Journal of the Whills, so maybe the Whills, or their keepers, began the entry for Star Wars in their journal with that sentence. If you didn't like midichlorians, you probably wouldn't have liked Lucas's sequels, and that's fine. It's just that the midichlorians themselves were never hard to understand. I figured out what they were as a kid. The Force has always been its own thing. Midichlorians were never supposed to be the Force. Midichlorians are just like receivers for the Force. They act in response to the Force. So how many midichlorians you have determines how Force sensitive you are. It's adding a little more science to this magic system. Lucas's version of episodes 7 to 9 were going to expand on this side of Star Wars. He says they were going to get into the microbiotic world. In understanding the Whills, the sequels would recontextualize everything the same way the prequels recontextualized episodes 4 to 6. So let's get into what the Whills actually are. The Whills basically are the will of the Force. We're basically like cars to the Whills. Again, see Rick Worley's video for a much more in-depth look at the Whills. I think it's very important to understand Lucas's original mythos for Star Wars, so that we can understand his version of the sequels. We know they would have recontextualized everything the way the prequels did. We know they'd expand on the Whills and lean more into biology and sort of the midichlorian side of things. We also know Star Wars is all about things being from a certain point of view and about perspectives. My theory is it would show us that the Whills were really directing everything. Maybe the Whills, despite being the tiniest creatures in Star Wars, were directing the events of episodes 1 to 6 to bring balance to the Force. Although, unfortunately, we may never see Lucas's finale on the big screen, we have some idea of what it might have looked like and what it might have been about. He had treatments for them early on, we know that for a fact. Apparently, 7 to 9 would take ideas from the Iraq War. They would have stormtroopers who refused to give up even if the Empire was defeated. And even though Luke and his friends won, and the New Republic was on its way up, these guys would stick around. The Imperial Remnant was something that existed in Jedi Academy and Jedi Outcast as well. Going all the way back to the prequels being part of his original vision, especially the Phantom Menace before changing things around, Darth Maul was going to be the big bad of the sequels. A very old version of Maul who was resurrected in the canon Clone Wars show. Him being in the animated series was deliberate and would have played into the sequels. It's all connected. I do love the prequels, I'm biased again, so I cannot stress enough how important they are to the overall vision. While Maul would serve as the new Emperor figure, he would have his own version of Vader in the form of Darth Talon, his apprentice and enforcer. They would take over as the Empire fell, becoming basically crime lords. I thought the Legacy comics were pretty cool, so having a canon version of Talon would have been interesting. Leia would lead the New Republic, and Luke would be trying to restart the Jedi Order. They'd fight Maul and the Imperial remnants of fanatical stormtroopers. The sequels would really be about Vader's grandchildren, because remember, Star Wars is about the Skywalker family at its core. They'd be about Han and Leia's kids, the daughter named Kira and the son who was called Sam. So we have the original versions of Rey and Kylo right here. Just like with Kylo Ren, Talon would bring Sam to the dark side, and Kira would find Luke and train with him. What's crazy to me is they got as far as having concept art of Kira, this is not Rey at all, training with Luke. There's plenty of art showing us what the world of the sequels would look like and what the protagonists would look like as well. Luke would be on a remote planet on a Jedi temple. He would be traumatized from some sort of event. It's shocking to hear that The Last Jedi not only used this aspect, but the fact that Luke died in Episode 8 as well. In finding more out about the sequels, we can see that some of his ideas were still used. It's just that the surrounding movies would have been different. So they just plucked these ideas out of the original scripts and put them into totally different movies. The concept art for the sequels has bits and pieces showing us Lucas's vision. Like, this would have been Luke's temple. To me at least, even if this temple is nothing compared to the stuff on Coruscant, there are visual motifs like this shot of the interior that tell us it is Jedi architecture. Another thing about The Last Jedi is events like Luke being a hermit would have been put in Episode 7, not 8, so we'd have plenty of time to see him rise to the occasion and train our new protagonists. When people say Luke's death in The Last Jedi is very Jedi-like and mirrors Obi-Wan's, they're not wrong. I even think it's something Lucas would have done in execution. But Lucas would have a bunch of stuff reframing the entire rest of the story. Like we'd have a movie and a half of Luke training our new heroes and meeting his old friends. A lot of people may agree that Kylo Ren or Ben Skywalker carried the sequels, not just because Adam Driver carried them with his acting and doing his best with the script, but because I believe he's one of the few remnants of Lucas's sequels that made it into the final product. Kylo Ren is still Sam Skywalker or Sam Solo. He was the most compelling part, it's just that they presented it in a sort of non-chronological order. By the end of the sequels, the New Republic would have Leia as its leader, and the New Jedi Order would have hundreds of members. So by the end of this rendition of the sequels, although Luke would still be dead, he would have died for something greater. The New Jedi Order and the New Republic would have reached new heights, having learned from the mistakes of the prequels. Now, although this ending sounds like something everyone would have wanted, Lucas also said the sequels would reveal Leia as being the chosen one. Although the details of what this means are still in Lucas's head, I do have a theory as to what it could be. We know the sequels would go into the microbiotic world and explore the Whills. We know that the Whills are important to Lucas's vision of Star Wars and that they are the will of the Force, but that they are also biological entities. We also know a recurring idea in Star Wars is from a certain point of view. So with this in mind, my guess is that Leia would study the Whills, and in the process of studying them as living things that seek balance in the Force, she would listen to them and, in her own way, from a certain point of view, become the chosen one that brings balance to the Force and saves the galaxy. I really believe that if we got Lucas's episodes 1 to 9, they would have come back together as a full story if you watched them from 1 to 9. Maybe not everyone would have liked it, but at least it would have been complete. It would have been his vision from start to finish. So to me, the sequels seem to have strong elements of Jedi Academy, with Imperial remnants and the criminal underworld as evil factions, and the New Republic and New Jedi Order as good factions. Maybe the closest look we have to the sequels is the Jedi Knight game series. You can find pieces of the original vision in the art books for the sequels. The concept art by itself is also pretty crazy. This guy, called the Jedi Killer, was probably folded into Kylo Ren later on. This was one of the alternate designs for Sam early in The Force Awakens. I think a huge reason why we never saw Lucas' sequels play out was because of the complaints and backlash all the way back in the prequel trilogy. Part of why Disney Star Wars turned out like it did, I think, is because of stuff like that. In going with the safest bet, not only did they sacrifice a new, unique vision, but they also sacrificed the entire story. I think things like the Revenge of the Sith novelization really proved that Lucas's ideas worked. They just didn't have enough space, and enough refinement, especially in the prequels. The Episode 3 book had a lot of stuff that couldn't fit into the film in it, and it suddenly made the politics of the prequels a little more relevant, and made everything make more sense. The ingredients were all there. Lucas just needed people who had faith in him, but could also refine his ideas. Unfortunately, that's not what we got. In having a remake of A New Hope, but bigger and better, we ended up getting a story that looped and ate itself. While Lucas's trilogy would have had the ending establish the New Republic and New Jedi Order, we saw the Disney trilogy basically start off by destroying all that stuff. The sequels also end with this horrifying, probably unintended symbolism. The prequels and original trilogy start off on Tatooine, with Anakin and Luke having boring or outright miserable lives there. The Skywalkers have to escape Tatooine to really begin their hero's journey. But the sequels bring the characters' legacies, their lightsabers, back to Tatooine and bury them there, meaning they basically fought for nothing. Nothing Disney puts out, no matter how far back in the past of Star Wars they go, will have any impact, because now we know it leads nowhere. The final sort of event in the franchise is a Palpatine taking on the Skywalker name, the last of the true Skywalkers dying, and their legacies being buried on Tatooine to be forgotten there. Star Wars used to be so universally recognizable and praised to the point where I could almost call it a modern myth. But the fact that people aren't flocking to see every single thing Star Wars anymore is a very bad sign for the franchise. One big redeeming factor is Visions, I think specifically because it's non-canon and each episode is a different take. We aren't afraid of the characters we're watching going nowhere, we can get invested in them. Non-canon anthologies retaining everything we love about Star Wars is one possible way out, but there is another. Despite taking place in the Star Wars universe, I believe the best modern Star Wars stuff out there is Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor. Cal Kestis to me is a great protagonist, and his story is simple but compelling. He relies on everything around him, even weapons like blasters, making him an unconventional Jedi. A hiding in plain sight Jedi that's willing to do anything to survive is something I've always wanted to see. Even if it includes the Inquisitors, which I'm sort of neutral on, I'm not too much of a fan of, I still think it fits, it captures what Star Wars is supposed to be, especially from my point of view. What this demonstrates to me is maybe the only way forward is to stay within Lucas's world of episodes 1 to 6, It's like every piece of media takes place right after Order 66 these days. We saw some of the High Republic, a Disney original era, in Jedi Survivor, so it could be interesting. I just don't think it's far enough away from the events of the prequels to have its own name. And I think everyone's just going to collectively ignore post-sequel content. They killed off the Skywalkers, the linchpin of the entire Star Wars saga. The Rey movie seems stuck in production hell. I haven't really kept up with it, so it seems all Disney can do to succeed at this point is stay in Lucas's world, the world of 1 to 6. They could, alternatively, use Lucas's treatments as a new timeline, but realistically, they won't. Now, there is one group of people that could use Lucas's treatments, that being the fans. People are already making all kinds of fan films and stuff, so maybe there's a group of people out there interested in making even an animated film or fan comic following Lucas's plans. At least the clues that we do have. There are plenty of interviews and stuff where we can piece together what Lucas had in mind. So perhaps making something animated, not limited by live action or necessarily needing a high budget, is the key here. In my opinion, the absolute best case scenario is this. Lucas finds a way to release his treatments or scripts for the sequels. The main reason I want to see Lucas's sequels is not because they're the canon end to the story. I want to understand his rendition of the Force, of the Whills, all that stuff, because we know the sequels have something in them that would have allowed us to completely reinterpret the story of Star Wars. It's just that we don't know what that something is. Regardless of your stance on Disney's Star Wars, we can all agree that the sequels shattered the fan base, especially The Last Jedi. And I think that if we get Lucas's treatments in one way or another, the fan base will sort of repair itself or split into two happy factions. People who want Disney Star Wars can enjoy that as one timeline. People who want Lucas's Star Wars can enjoy the treatments in whatever form they appear as. You can pick and choose what you want to make your own EU too. I would actually say Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor are part of my personal canon. Ultimately, in my opinion, the only way to save Star Wars is to inherit it ourselves and create the sequels from the pieces that Lucas left out there. If a group of people who can understand Lucas's visual storytelling gets together and does this, if they sort of remake the sequels themselves, it could be something amazing. So the answer is yes, Star Wars can be saved, but only by fans who want to see the end of Lucas's vision.